My name is Sienna Lowell. I'm 25 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I was a second-year law student at Georgetown. Now, I'm back in Charleston, South Carolina, sleeping in my childhood bedroom and staring down the wreckage my stepbrothers made of everything my mother built. 3 weeks ago, my mother died. Sudden aneurysm. No warning. She was in the kitchen, making tea, when she collapsed. By the time I arrived, the funeral had already been planned, and the will had already been read. Except I wasn't invited to the reading. It wasn't until I walked into our family's law firm, Lowell and Crane, built by my grandfather, that I learned the truth. According to the copy I demanded to see, my mother had left everything to my two stepbrothers, Brian and Lucas Crane: the house, the business, and full medical conservatorship over my father, who hasn't been of sound mind since his stroke last year. Nothing for me, no mention, not a dime, not even the piano in the sunroom that she promised would be mine. "Your mother's wishes were clear," said Raymond Burris, our family attorney. "The document is signed, notarized, and filed. There's not much you can do." But he wouldn't meet my eyes. He fidgeted with the corners of the document like it might disappear. That's when I knew something was wrong. My mother was meticulous, and she loved me deeply. She sent me handwritten notes every week while I was in school. We FaceTimed every Saturday. Just 3 days before her death, she told me she was updating her will, and asked for the name of the law professor I interned for. She was protective, precise, and no fool. Brian and Lucas were a different story. They were my stepfather's sons from his first marriage. When he married my mom 10 years ago, they were already in their 20s. And furious. Furious that he'd married a younger woman. Furious that she'd taken the lead on revitalizing the family's shipping business. Furious that she had a daughter smarter than either of them. I tried for years to keep the peace. But the last conversation I had with Lucas before she died still echoes. "Your mom's days are numbered, and when she's gone, don't expect a thing." I thought it was just cruelty. Now I know it was foreshadowing. I stayed calm, at least on the surface. After leaving the law office, I went straight to my mom's favorite cafe on King Street and sat in her usual booth by the window. I ordered chamomile, just like she used to. And I started taking notes. Everything I remembered. Every date she mentioned a new will. Every inconsistency in the story Raymond told me. Every suspicious detail about the newly filed document. Then I made a list. My mother's best friend, her accountant, her estate planner, and a notary public I remembered she used more than once. I made calls for 2 straight days. By the end of the week, I had a lead. Anita Ross, the notary whose name was on the will, had been in Florida the week it was supposedly signed. I couldn't have notarized anything in South Carolina that week. Anita told me over the phone. I was in Fort Lauderdale for my daughter's wedding. I have receipts, photos, even TSA flight records. I thanked her and hung up, my heart pounding. I knew what I had: forgery. The next day, I went to see my father. Brian met me at the door. "He's resting. Doctor's orders." I didn't flinch. I'm still his daughter, and I still have legal visitation rights. I saw him. Frail, thinner, confused. But when I kissed his forehead and whispered, "It's me, Sienna," I saw the light flicker in his eyes. He tried to say something, but Brian interrupted. "10 minutes, then you go." I nodded. But I had enough. I wasn't going to let my mother's memory be rewritten by 2 bitter men, and I wasn't going to let my father fade away under their control. That night, I called my law professor, Dr. Kinsey. I told her everything. "This is bigger than a civil claim," she said. "This is criminal fraud, and you, my dear, are going to need help." She connected me with a probate litigation firm that took my call the next morning. "We'll need everything," the partner said. "Timeline, signatures, affidavits, and we'll need to file an injunction immediately to freeze the transfer of the business shares." I had done the legwork. I had the receipts. And now, I had a legal team. They thought I was just a grieving daughter with no power, but they forgot what I was studying. I wasn't just going to take them to court. I was going to dismantle everything they built on lies, and I was going to bring my father home. The first thing I did was rent a storage unit on the edge of town, not for furniture, for files. I needed a place where Brian and Lucas couldn't snoop, somewhere I could work uninterrupted. Within days, the metal shelves were stacked with binders, shipping ledgers, scanned bank statements, witness interviews, and my own handwritten timelines. My mom's accountant, Sylvia Beck, came through in a big way. She'd grown up with my mother and handled the company's finances since before I was born. She told me she was updating the will, Sylvia said when I visited her home office. Said she didn't want the boys controlling the business without you. Did she mention which lawyer she was using? Not Raymond. She didn't trust him anymore. Said he was too cozy with Lucas. Bingo. Sylvia gave me copies of their last few email exchanges. They weren't directly damning, but they showed that my mother had made appointments with a different estate lawyer, a woman named Tara Jaffe. Tara's office was downtown, above a florist. I showed up with trembling hands and a backpack full of proof. She didn't need it. I was expecting you, she said. Apparently, my mother had given her explicit instructions. Revise the will. Place Sienna as primary guardian of her father, and leave Brian and Lucas a minor stake with oversight. The new draft was finished. My mother had planned to sign it the following week. Then she died, Tara said, and everything froze. Tara hadn't yet filed anything with the court. The previous will, likely the forged one, had been submitted by Raymond just one day after my mother's death. It was like they were waiting for her to die, I muttered. Tara didn't argue. With her cooperation, I now had documentation of intent and a witness to the real version of my mother's wishes. I was building a case. The litigation team drafted a petition to challenge the will on the basis of fraud, duress, and forgery. Meanwhile, I filed for temporary conservatorship over my father, citing conflict of interest. Lucas and Brian, predictably, lost their minds. Lucas left a voicemail screaming into the receiver. "You think you're smarter than everyone? You're just a kid playing lawyer." But Brian was quieter, more dangerous. He showed up at the cafe where I was reviewing files. "You're making a mistake," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "This is bigger than you. You're going to destroy the family." "You already did that," I replied, not looking up. He tried charm, then guilt, then threats. I recorded every word. And then I walked out, ready for war. 3 weeks after I came home, I sat in a courthouse filing an emergency injunction to freeze the transfer of my mother's estate assets. I wore the only suit I had left in Charleston and carried a red folder stuffed with affidavits, scanned emails, and a sworn statement from Anita Ross, the notary who had been in Florida. The clerk took the papers and told me to wait. So I did. 5 hours, cold coffee in hand, nerves fraying. When I was finally called into chambers, the probate judge looked at me over his glasses. "You're representing yourself?" "For now," I said. "My counsel is joining by phone." He reviewed the packet silently, flipping page by page. "Forgery, fraud, elder abuse. These are serious allegations, Miss Lowell." "I know, Your Honor. That's why I'm here." He nodded slowly. "I'll grant a temporary freeze on all estate transfers, including medical conservatorship. There will be a formal hearing in 10 days. Make sure you're ready." I was more than ready. That night, I called Dr. Kinsey and cried for the first time since my mother died. Not out of grief, but relief. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was winning ground. Over the next week, the private investigator hired by the litigation firm dug into Raymond Burris's financial records. They found wire transfers from a shell company connected to Lucas, dated the same week my mother died. Meanwhile, my best friend from Georgetown, Nina Delgado, flew down to help me sort through documents. She was working with a white-collar defense firm in D.C. and had a keen eye for corporate misdeeds. Together, we discovered something chilling. Lucas had registered a new LLC using the name Lowell Crane Global Logistics, identical to my grandfather's company but filed under his own address in Savannah. They planned a full takeover, Nina said, and they knew it would go through faster if your mother and father were out of the picture. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I visited my father again. This time, I brought a certified letter from the court and copies of the injunction. The home nurse, a kind woman named Maisie, let me in. He asks about you every day, she said softly. They tell him you've left the country. My throat tightened. I walked into his room and sat beside him. Dad, it's me. I'm here. And I'm getting you out. His eyes welled with tears. He reached for my hand and whispered, They said, you forgot me. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. I would never, I said. We're going to fix everything. Maisie agreed to testify in court, detailing the way Brian and Lucas restricted visitors and isolated our father. With her help and court documents in hand, I began drafting my opening statement. 10 days. That's all I had. 10 days to bring a decade of secrets into the light. 10 days to prove I wasn't just the grieving daughter. I was the rightful heir. And I was coming for everything they stole. The morning of the preliminary hearing, I stood in front of the Charleston County Courthouse in a borrowed navy blazer, clutching a binder with every shred of evidence Nina and I had collected. It was overcast, muggy, and I hadn't slept in 36 hours. But I was ready. The courtroom was packed, not with strangers, but with old family acquaintances, former board members of Lowell Crane Global Logistics, and local business people who had come to see what had become of the once proud Lowell name. I caught Lucas's eye. He looked relaxed, cocky even, sitting with his overpriced attorney in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. When the judge called us forward, I walked up confidently. Nina sat in the front row, giving me a firm nod. My hands were steady as I laid out the first part of our case. Timelines, discrepancies in the will, the notary's sworn affidavit from Florida, and the LLC filings that Lucas had conveniently dated 2 days after my mother's funeral. Lucas's attorney, a slick man named Conrad Myers, tried to object on grounds of speculation. The judge overruled. I could see Lucas's confidence waver. But then, Brian took the stand. He painted a picture of me as the estranged stepdaughter, the one who abandoned the family after law school, who had problems with responsibility, and struggled to accept that her mother had moved on. I clenched my jaw, listening to the lies. When it was my turn to cross-examine, I didn't raise my voice. I just asked one question. Can you explain why you were listed as a managing officer on a logistics company registered in Savannah, Georgia, the same company that shares the name of my grandfather's firm, filed 2 weeks before my mother's death? He froze. Objection, Conrad barked. Irrelevant. The judge shook his head. I want to hear the answer, Brian stammered. It was a contingency plan. We didn't know what state she'd be in. So, you anticipated her death? I asked. Dead silence. The judge recessed for the afternoon, calling both legal teams to chambers. Nina met me in the hallway, her face flushed with adrenaline. You hit a nerve, she said. Big time. Back in chambers, the judge was direct. I'm moving this to a full evidentiary hearing. Ms. Lowell, your petition has merit. I suggest you retain full-time legal representation. Mr. Myers, I'd advise your clients to consider mediation. Outside, I finally exhaled. The battle wasn't over. But I had cracked their armor. That night, I received a call from Maisie. "They moved your father," she said. "They didn't tell me where." My blood went cold. It was a desperate move, one that told me they were afraid. I filed an emergency motion for guardianship the next morning. Within 48 hours, I would either find my father or risk losing him forever. I stared out my motel window, the city skyline blurred by humidity and rage. They thought they were fighting a girl in grief. But I was a woman with a plan, and the next hearing would bring the storm. The emergency hearing for temporary guardianship of my father was scheduled just 48 hours after we filed. It was a narrow window, but enough for Nina and I to piece together the most crucial evidence we had left, including medical records, power of attorney documents, and a witness statement from Maisie. We entered the courtroom that morning with 3 goals: prove that my father was being hidden, that his current guardianship was invalid, and that he needed protection. My hands were steadier than they had been in weeks. I was done reacting. I was ready to strike. Nina handled the opening arguments, laying out the pattern of manipulation. "Mr. Lowell is currently under the custody of individuals with a direct financial interest in his estate," she said. "We have reason to believe he's being denied access to his preferred medical providers, social support, and daughter, who, up until 2 months ago, shared healthcare decision-making authority." The judge, a woman named Deborah Harlan, listened intently. She had a reputation for being sharp, no nonsense. We needed that. Lucas's team argued, predictably, that my father had expressed a desire to remain under their care. "He's in a secure facility," Conrad said, "with 24-hour support, provided by the same agency Mrs. Lowell hired before her passing." "So why hasn't his daughter been allowed to visit him in over a month?" Judge Harlan asked. There was a pause. A long one. Then Conrad muttered something about facility policy during investigation. The judge looked unimpressed. "You'll need to do better than that, counsel." My testimony came next. I kept it focused and professional. I described the care my father had been receiving, how we'd made a joint plan for his transition, how I'd continued to manage his prescriptions, transportation, and dietary needs, until I was abruptly cut off. I showed the judge my original durable power of attorney, co-signed by both my parents before my mother's illness had worsened. Nina submitted call logs showing my attempts to contact the care facility. Maisie's sworn statement confirmed my stepbrothers had shown up unannounced, with papers and a lawyer. "They came with a new POA signed the day after Sienna was served the eviction notice," she wrote. Mr. Lowell was confused. He asked where his daughter was. They told him she moved on. A ripple of tension moved through the courtroom. The judge called a recess. Outside, we waited in tense silence. Lucas paced. Brian wouldn't look at me. When we were called back, Judge Harlan delivered her ruling swiftly. "Effective immediately," she said, "Ms. Sienna Lowell is reinstated as temporary guardian of Richard Lowell, pending a full investigation. Mr. Lowell is to be transferred to a neutral facility within the next 72 hours. Lucas objected. The judge shut him down. "Try that again," she warned, "and I'll refer this case to elder abuse investigators myself." I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I walked out of that courtroom with one thought on my mind. Find Dad. Maisie and I arrived at the facility by 4 p.m. They were already packing his things. The nurse on duty whispered to me, "He kept asking if you were coming." When I walked into his room, my father looked up. His eyes were cloudy but alert. "Kiddo?" he said hoarsely. "I thought they got rid of you." I knelt beside his wheelchair, tears catching in my throat. "Not even close, Dad." He took my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. They'd tried to erase me, but I was still here. And this time, I wasn't letting go. Over the next several weeks, I moved through life with the kind of clarity only a courtroom victory can deliver. Dad was resettled in a private care facility just 20 minutes from my apartment. this time under my full guardianship. He had a window view of the lake, fresh flowers delivered weekly, and a rotating team of therapists he'd actually picked himself. I knew the fight wasn't over. With the guardianship ruling behind us, Nina and I filed a civil suit to contest the forged will and demand restitution for elder exploitation. The evidence was strong. Maisie's affidavit, digital logs from the care facility, financial withdrawals that started the week after my mother's funeral. Even more damning was the handwriting analysis showing inconsistencies between my mother's actual signature and the one on the fake will. Lucas and Brian's legal teams stalled, filed motions to delay, and at one point even tried to get the entire case dismissed, arguing, family disagreements over inheritance are common and not necessarily fraudulent. The judge didn't buy it. When we finally reached the full hearing, my stepbrothers didn't even bother to show. Their attorneys read a short, soulless statement, saying they were willing to settle to avoid unpleasant publicity. The final ruling restored my share of the estate, nullified the forged documents, and assigned a financial conservator to audit every transaction made by Lucas and Brian over the past 12 months. They were also ordered to pay damages, enough to ensure my father's care would never again depend on anyone's greed. After the ruling, I walked to the shoreline near the courthouse. The waves were calm, the sky soft with a late spring haze. For the first time since this all began, I let myself feel everything. Grief, anger, exhaustion, and then relief. I didn't just win a legal case. I saved my father from being manipulated. I saved my mother's final wishes from being twisted, and I reclaimed my voice in a family that tried to silence it. Weeks later, I received an email from the State Bar's Elder Justice Division. They'd read the court filings, heard about the case from the probate judge, and wanted to interview me. Not as a victim, but as a future advocate. "We're assembling a review board," the message read. "You have first-hand knowledge, both legal and personal. Would you consider joining?" I said yes, without hesitation. One Friday evening, I visited Dad at the facility. He was watching the sunset from the patio, his hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. "They finally left us alone," he said. "They did," I nodded, "and they won't be coming back." He reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your mom would be proud." That night, I drove home in silence, replaying everything: the forged will, the eviction, the hearings, the whispered conversations in the hallway outside the courtroom. All the parts of this story I'd never wanted, but now owned. I'm Sienna Lowell, and I don't run from a fight, especially not when justice is on the line.